The Articles of Confederation, formerly the Articles of Confederation and Perpetual Union, was an agreement among the 13 original states of the United States of America that served as its first constitution. It was approved, after much debate, between July 1776 and November 1777, by the Second Continental Congress on November 15, 1777, and sent to the states for ratification. The Articles of Confederation came into force on March 1, 1781, after being ratified by all 13 states. A guiding principle of the Articles was to preserve the independence and sovereignty of the states. The federal government received only those powers which the colonies had recognized as belonging to king and parliament. The Articles formed a wartime confederation of states, with an extremely limited central government. While unratified, the document was used by the Congress to conduct business, direct the American Revolutionary War, conduct diplomacy with foreign nations, and deal with territorial issues and Native American relations. The adoption of the Articles made few perceptible changes in the federal government, because it did little more than legalize what the Continental Congress had been doing. That body was renamed the Congress of the Confederation, but Americans continued to call it the Continental Congress, since its organization remained the same. As the Confederation Congress attempted to govern the continually growing American states, delegates discovered that the limitations placed upon the central government rendered it ineffective at doing so. As the government's weaknesses became apparent, especially after Shay's rebellion, individuals began asking for changes to the Articles. Their hope was to create a stronger national government. Initially, some states met to deal with their trade and economic problems. However, as more states became interested in meeting to change the Articles, a meeting was set in Philadelphia on May 25, 1787. This became the Constitutional Convention. It was quickly realized that changes would not work, and instead the entire Articles needed to be replaced. On March 4, 1789, the government under the Articles was replaced with the federal government under the Constitution. The new Constitution provided for a much stronger federal government by establishing a chief executive, the president, courts, and taxing powers. Background and context. The political push to increase cooperation among the then loyal colonies began with the Albany Congress in 1754 and Benjamin Franklin's proposed Albany Plan, an intercolonial collaboration to help solve mutual local problems. The Articles of Confederation would bear some resemblance to it. Over the next 2 decades, some of the basic concepts it addressed would strengthen and others would weaken, particularly the degree of deserved loyalty to the Crown. With civil disobedience resulting in coercive, and what the colonials perceived as intolerable acts of Parliament, and armed conflict resulting in dissidents being proclaimed rebels and outside the king's protection, any loyalty remaining shifted toward independence and how to achieve it. In 1775, with events outpacing communications, the Second Continental Congress began acting as the provisional government that would run the American Revolutionary War and gain the colonies their collective independence. It was an era of constitution writing. Most states were busy at the task and leaders felt the new nation must have a written constitution, even though other nations did not. During the war, Congress exercised an unprecedented level of political, diplomatic, military, and economic authority. It adopted trade restrictions, established and maintained an army, issued fiat money, created a military code and negotiated with foreign governments. To transform themselves from outlaws into a legitimate nation, the colonists needed international recognition for their cause and foreign allies to support it. In early 1776, Thomas Paine argued in the closing pages of the first edition of Common Sense that the custom of nations demanded a formal declaration of American independence if any European power were to mediate a peace between the Americans and Great Britain. The monarchies of France and Spain in particular could not be expected to aid those they considered rebels against another legitimate monarch. Foreign courts needed to have American grievances laid before them persuasively in a manifesto which could also reassure them that the Americans would be reliable trading partners. Without such a declaration, Paine concluded, he custom of all courts is against us, and will be so, until, by an independence, we take rank with other nations. Beyond improving their existing association, the records of the Second Continental Congress show that the need for a declaration of independence was intimately linked with the demands of international relations. On June 7, 1776, Richard Henry Lee introduced a resolution before the Continental Congress declaring the colonies independent. At the same time, he also urged Congress to resolve to take the most effectual measures for forming foreign alliances and to prepare a plan of confederation for the newly independent states. Congress then created 3 overlapping committees to draft the Declaration, a model treaty, and the Articles of Confederation. The Declaration announced the states' entry into the international system. The model treaty was designed to establish amity and commerce with other states, and the Articles of Confederation, which established a firm league among the 13 free and independent states, constituted an international agreement to set up central institutions for the conduct of vital domestic and foreign affairs. Drafting. On June 12, 1776, a day after appointing a committee to prepare a draft of the Declaration of Independence, the Second Continental Congress resolved to appoint a committee of 13 to prepare a draft of a constitution for a union of the states. The committee met repeatedly, and Chairman John Dickinson presented their results to the Congress on July 12, 1776. There were long debates on such issues as sovereignty, the exact powers to be given the Confederate government, whether to have a judiciary, and voting procedures. The final draft of the Articles was prepared in the summer of 1777 and the Second Continental Congress approved them for ratification by the individual states on November 15, 1777, after a year of debate. In practice, the Articles were in use beginning in 1777. The final draft of the Articles served as the de facto system of government used by the Congress, the United States in Congress assembled, until it became de jure by final ratification on March 1, 1781, at which point Congress became the Congress of the Confederation. Under the Articles, the states retained sovereignty over all governmental functions not specifically relinquished to the national government. The individual articles set the rules for current and future operations of the United States government. It was made capable of making war and peace, negotiating diplomatic and commercial agreements with foreign countries, and deciding disputes between the states, including their additional and contested western territories. Article 13 stipulated that their provisions shall be inviolably observed by every state and the Union shall be perpetual. John Dickinson's and Benjamin Franklin's handwritten drafts of the Articles of Confederation are housed at the National Archives in Washington, D.C. Operation. The Articles were created by delegates from the states in the Second Continental Congress out of a need to have a plan of confederacy for securing the freedom, sovereignty, and independence of the United States. After the war, nationalists, especially those who had been active in the Continental Army, complained that the Articles were too weak for an effective government. There was no president, no executive agencies, no judiciary, and no tax base. The absence of a tax base meant that there was no way to pay off state and national debts from the war years except by requesting money from the states, which seldom arrived. In 1788, with the approval of Congress, the Articles were replaced by the United States Constitution and the new government began operations in 1789. Ratification. Congress began to move for ratification of the Articles of Confederation in 1777. Permit us, then, earnestly to recommend these articles to the immediate and dispassionate attention of the legislatures of the respective states. Let them be candidly reviewed under a sense of the difficulty of combining in one system the various sentiments and interests of a continent divided into so many sovereign and independent communities, under a conviction of the absolute necessity of uniting all our counsels and all our strength, to maintain and defend our common liberties. The document could not become officially effective until it was ratified by all 13 states. The first state to ratify was Virginia on December 16, 1777, the 13th state to ratify was Maryland on February 2, 1781. A ceremonial confirmation of this 13th, final ratification took place in the Congress on March 1, 1781, at high noon. 12 states had ratified the Articles by February 1779, 14 months into the process. Maryland, however, refused to go along until the landed states, especially Virginia, had indicated they were prepared to cede their claims west of the Ohio River to the Union. It would be 2 years before the Maryland legislature became satisfied that they would follow through, and voted to ratify. Article summaries. The Articles of Confederation contain a preamble, 13 articles, a conclusion, and a signatory section. The preamble declares that the states agree to certain articles of Confederation and perpetual union. What follows here summarizes the purpose and content of each of the 13 articles. Establishes the name of the Confederation with these words, "The style of this Confederacy shall be the United States of America." Asserts the sovereignty of each state, except for the specific powers delegated to the Confederation government. Each state retains its sovereignty, freedom, and independence, and every power, jurisdiction, and right, which is not by this Confederation expressly delegated. Declares the purpose of the Confederation. The said states hereby severally enter into a firm league of friendship with each other, for their common defense, the security of their liberties, and their mutual and general welfare, binding themselves to assist each other, against all force offered to, or attacks made upon them, or any of them, on account of religion, sovereignty, trade, or any other pretense whatever. Elaborates upon the intent to secure and perpetuate mutual friendship and intercourse among the people of the different states in this union, and to establish equal treatment and freedom of movement for the free inhabitants of each state to pass unhindered between the states, excluding paupers, vagabonds, and fugitives from justice. All these people are entitled to equal rights established by the state into which they travel. If a crime is committed in one state and the perpetrator flees to another state, he will be extradited to and tried in the state in which the crime was committed. Allocates one vote in the Congress of the Confederation, the United States in Congress assembled, to each state, which is entitled to a delegation of between 2 and 7 members. Members of Congress are to be appointed by state legislatures. No congressman may serve more than 3 out of any 6 years. Only the central government may declare war, or conduct foreign political or commercial relations. No state or official may accept foreign gifts or titles, and granting any title of nobility is forbidden to all. No states may form any subnational groups. No state may tax or interfere with treaty stipulations already proposed. No state may wage war without permission of Congress, unless invaded or under imminent attack on the frontier. No state may maintain a peacetime standing army or navy, unless infested by pirates, but every state is required to keep ready, a well-trained, disciplined, and equipped militia. Whenever an army is raised for common defense, the state legislatures shall assign military ranks of colonel and below. Expenditures by the United States of America will be paid with funds raised by state legislatures, and apportioned to the states in proportion to the real property values of each. Powers and functions of the United States in Congress assembled. Grants to the United States in Congress assembled the sole and exclusive right and power to determine peace and war, to exchange ambassadors, to enter into treaties and alliances, with some provisos, to establish rules for deciding all cases of captures or prizes on land or water, to grant letters of marque and reprisal, documents authorizing privateers, in times of peace, to appoint courts for the trial of pirates and crimes committed on the high seas, to establish courts for appeals in all cases of captures, but no member of Congress may be appointed a judge, to set weights and measures, including coins, and for Congress to serve as a final court for disputes between states. The court will be composed of jointly appointed commissioners or Congress shall appoint them. Each commissioner is bound by oath to be impartial. The court's decision is final. Congress shall regulate the post offices, appoint officers in the military, and regulate the armed forces. The United States in Congress assembled may appoint a president who shall not serve longer than 1 year per 3-year term of the Congress. Congress may request requisitions, demands for payments or supplies, from the states in proportion with their population, or take credit. Congress may not declare war, enter into treaties and alliances, appropriate money, or appoint a commander-in-chief without 9 states assented. Congress shall keep a journal of proceedings and adjourn for periods not to exceed 6 months. When Congress is in recess, any of the powers of Congress may be executed by the Committee of the States, or any 9 of them, except for those powers of Congress which require 9 states in Congress to execute. If Canada, as the British-held province of Quebec was also known, accedes to this confederation, it will be admitted. No other colony could be admitted without the consent of 9 states. Reaffirms that the Confederation accepts war debt incurred by Congress before the existence of the Articles. Declares that the Articles shall be perpetual, and may be altered only with the approval of Congress and the ratification of all the state legislatures. While still at war with Britain, the Revolution's leaders were divided between forming a national government with powers either strong and centralized, the Federalists, or strictly limited, the Anti-Federalists. The Continental Congress compromised by dividing sovereignty between the states and the central government, with a unicameral legislature that protected the liberty of the individual states. It empowered Congress to regulate military and monetary affairs, for example, but provided no mechanism to compel the states to comply with requests for either troops or funding. This left the military vulnerable to inadequate funding, supplies, or even food. End of the Revolutionary War. The Treaty of Paris, 1783, which ended hostilities with Great Britain, languished in Congress for months because several state representatives failed to attend sessions of the national legislature to ratify it. Yet Congress had no power to enforce attendance. In September 1783, George Washington complained that Congress was paralyzed. Many revolutionaries had gone to their respective home countries after the war, and local government and self-rule seemed quite satisfactory. Function. The Army. The Articles supported the congressional direction of the Continental Army, and allowed the states to present a unified front when dealing with the European powers. As a tool to build a centralized war-making government, they were largely a failure, historian Bruce Chadwick wrote. George Washington had been one of the very first proponents of a strong federal government. The Army had nearly disbanded on several occasions during the winters of the war because of the weaknesses of the Continental Congress. The delegates could not draft soldiers and had to send requests for regular troops and militia to the states. Congress had the right to order the production and purchase of provisions for the soldiers, but could not force anyone to supply them, and the Army nearly starved in several winters of war. The Continental Congress, before the Articles were approved, had promised soldiers a pension of half pay for life. However, Congress had no power to compel the states to fund this obligation, and as the war wound down after the victory at Yorktown, the sense of urgency to support the military was no longer a factor. No progress was made in Congress during the winter of 1783–84. General Henry Knox, who would later become the first Secretary of War under the Constitution, blamed the weaknesses of the Articles for the inability of the government to fund the Army. The Army had long been supportive of a strong union. Knox wrote, "The Army generally have always reprobated the idea of being 13 armies. Their ardent desires have been to be one continental body looking up to one sovereign. It is a favorite toast in the Army, a hoop to the barrel or cement to the Union." As Congress failed to act on the petitions, Knox wrote to Gouverneur Morris, 4 years before the Philadelphia Convention was convened, "As the present Constitution is so defective, why do not you great men call the people together and tell them so, that is, to have a convention of the states to form a better constitution?" Once the war had been won, the Continental Army was largely disbanded. A very small national force was maintained to man the frontier forts and to protect against Native American attacks. Meanwhile, each of the states had an army, or militia, and 11 of them had navies. The wartime promises of bounties and land grants to be paid for service were not being met. In 1783, George Washington defused the Newburgh Conspiracy, but riots by unpaid Pennsylvania veterans forced Congress to leave Philadelphia temporarily. The Congress from time to time during the Revolutionary War requisitioned troops from the states. Any contributions were voluntary, and in the debates of 1788 the Federalists, who supported the proposed new constitution, claimed that state politicians acted unilaterally, and contributed when the Continental Army protected their state's interests. The Anti-Federalists claimed that state politicians understood their duty to the Union and contributed to advance its needs. Doherty, 2009, concludes that generally the state's behavior validated the Federalist analysis. This helps explain why the Articles of Confederation needed reforms. Foreign policy. Even after peace had been achieved in 1783, the weakness of the Confederation government frustrated the ability of the government to conduct foreign policy. In 1789, Thomas Jefferson, concerned over the failure to fund an American naval force to confront the Barbary pirates, wrote to James Monroe, "It will be said there is no money in the Treasury. There never will be money in the Treasury till the Confederacy shows its teeth. The states must see the rod." Furthermore, the J. Gardo Quay Treaty with Spain in 1789 also showed weakness in foreign policy. In this treaty, which was never ratified due to its immense unpopularity, the United States was to give up rights to use the Mississippi River for 25 years, which would have economically strangled the settlers west of the Appalachian Mountains. Finally, due to the Confederation's military weakness, it could not compel the British Army to leave frontier forts which were on American soil, forts which, in 1783, the British promised to leave, but which they delayed leaving pending U.S. implementation of other provisions such as ending action against loyalists and allowing them to seek compensation. This incomplete British implementation of the Treaty of Paris, 1783, was superseded by the implementation of Jay's Treaty in 1795 under the new U.S. Constitution. Taxation and Commerce. Under the Articles of Confederation, the central government's power was kept quite limited. The Confederation Congress could make decisions, but lacked enforcement powers. Implementation of most decisions, including modifications to the Articles, required unanimous approval of all 13 state legislatures. Congress was denied any powers of taxation; it could only request money from the states. The states often failed to meet these requests in full, leaving both Congress and the Continental Army chronically short of money. As more money was printed by Congress, the continental dollars depreciated. In 1779, George Washington wrote to John Jay, who was serving as the president of the Continental Congress, that a wagon load of money will scarcely purchase a wagon load of provisions. Mr. Jay and the Congress responded in May by requesting $45 million from the states. In an appeal to the states to comply, Jay wrote that the taxes were the price of liberty, the peace, and the safety of yourselves and posterity. He argued that Americans should avoid having it said that America had no sooner become independent than she became insolvent, or that her infant glories and growing fame were obscured and tarnished by broken contracts and violated faith. The states did not respond with any of the money requested from them. Congress had also been denied the power to regulate either foreign trade or interstate commerce, and, as a result, all of the states maintained control over their own trade policies. The states and the Confederation Congress both incurred large debts during the Revolutionary War, and how to repay those debts became a major issue of debate following the war. Some states paid off their war debts and others did not. Federal assumption of the states' war debts became a major issue in the deliberations of the Constitutional Convention. Accomplishments of the Confederation. Nevertheless, the Confederation Congress did take two actions with long-lasting impact. The Land Ordinance of 1785 and Northwest Ordinance created territorial government, set up protocols for the admission of new states and the division of land into useful units, and set aside land in each township for public use. This system represented a sharp break from imperial colonization, as in Europe, and provided the basis for the rest of American continental expansion through the 19th century. The Land Ordinance of 1785 established both the general practices of land surveying in the West and Northwest and the land ownership provisions used throughout the later westward expansion beyond the Mississippi River. Frontier lands were surveyed into the now familiar squares of land called the township, 36 square miles, the section, 1 square mile, and the quarter section, 160 acres. This system was carried forward to most of the states west of the Mississippi, excluding areas of Texas and California that had already been surveyed and divided up by the Spanish Empire. Then, when the Homestead Act was enacted in 1867, the quarter section became the basic unit of land that was granted to new settler farmers. The Northwest Ordinance of 1787 noted the agreement of the original states to give up northwestern land claims, organized the Northwest Territory and laid the groundwork for the eventual creation of new states. While it didn't happen under the Articles, the land north of the Ohio River and west of the present western border of Pennsylvania ceded by Massachusetts, Connecticut, New York, Pennsylvania, and Virginia, eventually became the states of Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, and Wisconsin, and the part of Minnesota east of the Mississippi River. The Northwest Ordinance of 1787 also made great advances in the abolition of slavery. New states admitted to the Union in this territory would never be slave states. No new states were admitted to the Union under the Articles of Confederation. The Articles provided for a blanket acceptance of the province of Quebec, referred to as Canada in the Articles, into the United States if it chose to do so. It did not, and the subsequent Constitution carried no such special provision of admission. Additionally, ordinances to admit Franklin, later modified to Franklin, Kentucky, and Vermont to the Union were considered, but none were approved. The United States of America under the Articles. The peace treaty left the United States independent and at peace but with an unsettled governmental structure. The Articles envisioned a permanent confederation, but granted to the Congress the only federal institution little power to finance itself or to ensure that its resolutions were enforced. There was no president and no national court. Although historians generally agree that the Articles were too weak to hold the fast-growing nation together, they do give credit to the settlement of the Western issue, as the states voluntarily turned over their lands to national control. By 1783, with the end of the British blockade, the new nation was regaining its prosperity. However, trade opportunities were restricted by the mercantilism of the British and French empires. The ports of the British West Indies were closed to all staple products which were not carried in British ships. France and Spain established similar policies. Simultaneously, new manufacturers faced sharp competition from British products which were suddenly available again. Political unrest in several states and efforts by debtors to use popular government to erase their debts increased the anxiety of the political and economic elites which had led the revolution. The apparent inability of the Congress to redeem the public obligations, debts, incurred during the war, or to become a forum for productive cooperation among the states to encourage commerce and economic development, only aggravated a gloomy situation. In 1786–87, Shay's Rebellion, an uprising of dissidents in western Massachusetts against the state court system, threatened the stability of state government. The Continental Congress printed paper money which was so depreciated that it ceased to pass as currency, spawning the expression "not worth a continental." Congress could not levy taxes and could only make requisitions upon the states. Less than $1.5 million came into the Treasury between 1781 and 1784, although the governors had been asked for $2 million in 1783 alone. When John Adams went to London in 1785 as the first representative of the United States, he found it impossible to secure a treaty for unrestricted commerce. Demands were made for favors and there was no assurance that individual states would agree to a treaty. Adams stated it was necessary for the states to confer the power of passing navigation laws to Congress, or that the states themselves pass retaliatory acts against Great Britain. Congress had already requested and failed to get power over navigation laws. Meanwhile, each state acted individually against Great Britain to little effect. When other New England states closed their ports to British shipping, Connecticut hastened to profit by opening its ports. By 1787 Congress was unable to protect manufacturing and shipping. State legislatures were unable or unwilling to resist attacks upon private contracts and public credit. Land speculators expected no rise in values when the government could not defend its borders nor protect its frontier population. The idea of a convention to revise the Articles of Confederation grew in favor. Alexander Hamilton realized while serving as Washington's top aide that a strong central government was necessary to avoid foreign intervention and allay the frustrations due to an ineffectual Congress. Hamilton led a group of like-minded nationalists, won Washington's endorsement, and convened the Annapolis Convention in 1786 to petition Congress to call a constitutional convention to meet in Philadelphia to remedy the long-term crisis. Signatures. The Second Continental Congress approved the Articles for distribution to the states on November 15, 1777. A copy was made for each state and one was kept by the Congress. On November 28, the copies sent to the states for ratification were unsigned, and the cover letter, dated November 17, had only the signatures of Henry Laurens and Charles Thomson, who were the President and Secretary to the Congress. The Articles, however, were unsigned, and the date was blank. Congress began the signing process by examining their copy of the Articles on June 27, 1778. They ordered a final copy prepared, the one in the National Archives, and that delegates should inform the Secretary of their authority for ratification. On July 9, 1778, the prepared copy was ready. They dated it, and began to sign. They also requested each of the remaining states to notify its delegation when ratification was completed. On that date, delegates present from New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and South Carolina signed the Articles to indicate that their states had ratified. New Jersey, Delaware, and Maryland could not, since their states had not ratified. North Carolina and Georgia also didn't sig.
Please subscribe and thanks for watching.